Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. I'm Hari-kirtana, and this is Bhagavad Gita Satsang. As always, it is a great pleasure for me to be here with you and a great honor to have you here with me. So thank you very much for choosing to spend some of your time this evening with me. I, of course, would like to know that I can be heard. So if you are out there in webinar land and you can hear me, please raise your hand. Yay. Thank you very much for the validation. It's always nice to feel validated. All right. Let's take care of just a few other bits of standard operating procedure. You need not adjust your audio settings or your viewing options because I can't. Oh, you can. I'm sorry. I'm so confused. I'm a confused man. You can adjust your audio settings and your viewing options up in the upper right-hand corner if you so desire. You don't need to worry about your microphone or your video camera because you can see and hear me, but I cannot see or hear you. And if you have any questions, you can type them into the Q&A, and I'm going to ask you to worry about your video camera, but I ask, how about now? Cannot see or hear you. And if you have any questions, you can type from my audience them into the Q&A, and I'm going to ask you to. There we go. Worry about your video camera, but I will ask how. All right, there we go. Another crisis for your video camera, where we will ask how about now? Hear you. And if you have any questions, you can type that all about. I'm them into the Q&A, and I'm going to ask you to putting this out live on Facebook at the same time that I'm speaking here in Zoom. Worry about your. All right, there we go. Another crisis. If folks out there in Facebook, where all like to see your video camera, but we will ask how about now? Hear you. We are, and if you have any questions, you can type little experiments this evening them into the Q&A, and I'm going to ask you to Facebook at the same time. Fools and demons. There we go. As far as Krishna is concerned, qualifies. Worry about your. All right, there we go. Another crisis. And we covered verses where all for your video camera. This evening, but we will ask how about now? Hear you. Consistent. And if you have any questions, you can type this little experiment this evening them into the Q&A, and I'm going to ask you to Facebook as far as Krishna is concerned. There we go. And talk about three ways to we also heard worry about your. All right, there we go. Another crisis. As far this evening, where all for your video camera. But we will ask how about now? Hear you. And if you have any questions, you can type a little experiment them into the Q&A, and I'm going to ask you to talk about three ways. There we go. We also heard about worry about your. All right, there we go. Another crisis. This evening, where all for your video camera. But we will ask how about now? Hear you. And if you have any questions, you can type a little experiment this evening them into the Q&A, and I'm going to ask you to. Okay, please send me some additional feedback once again. Am I sounding okay, or am I sounding all bizarro? And how is the video looking? So I will wait for any of you. Better? Okay, that's encouraging. Jess, would you kindly weigh in as well? And let me know, because I did see your message. All right. Until I hear otherwise, we'll proceed. Better, better. Okay, more better. Yay! On the assumption that it continues to be more better, I will proceed. With our invocation mantra. For those of you who are new to our satsang and are not so familiar with the diacritical marks that give us the cues for proper pronunciation in transliterated Sanskrit, the dot over the M indicates that we close the back of our tongue up to the back of the roof of our mouth, at the same time bringing our lips together in front when you see a dot over an M. And the bar over a vowel, in this case an A, indicates a long open version of the sound as opposed to a short truncated version of the sound. And there you go. I will chant this line, this invocation mantra, and give you a moment to chant it back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Meaning, indicating the absolute reality, I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, who is all-pervading. This idea of all-pervading is going to show up in the verses that we are going to study this evening. But before we get to our verses for this week, I just want to pick up where we finished. Our last verse of our last class was this one, 14. Satatam kirtayanto mam yatantascha dritha vritaha namasyantascha mam bhaktya nitya yukta upasate. Meaning, always chanting my glories, endeavoring with great determination, bowing down before me, these great souls perpetually worship me with devotion. Or, always glorifying me. The Sanskrit word kirtan is in kirtayanto, indicates glorification. We usually associate that word with kirtan, chanting. Endeavoring with great determination, dridha vrata. So a vrata is like a vow, an intense vow to do something. Namasyantash nama, offering honor. Bhaktya, mam bhaktya, means devotion to me. Krishna is speaking, so devotion to me. Nitya yukta, so nitya means eternal. Yukta, as in the root of the word yoga being yuj, yukta means yoking, connecting. So eternally connected to me, or perpetual union, is the condition of one who is engaged in these various activities. So that's where we left off. So now we're going to pivot to a different kind of person in verse 15. So I'm going to read just the translations, and then we will come back and chant the first verse and go into each of these verses in detail. So here we go. This is chapter 9, verse 15. There are also others whose offerings consist of the cultivation of knowledge, who worship me as undifferentiated oneness, as diverse within many, and as the all-pervading Lord of the universe whose face is turned everywhere. Text 16. I am the ritual, I am the sacrifice, and I am the benediction. I am the healing herb and the transcendental chant. Indeed, it is I alone who am the clarified butter, I who am the fire, and I who am the offering. Text 17. I am the father of this universe, the mother, the creator, and the grandfather. I am what is to be known, that which purifies, and the vibration Om. Know me to be the Rig Veda, Sama Veda, and the Yajur Veda as well. Text 18. I am the goal, the sustainer, the master, and the witness. I am the abode, the shelter, and the most intimate friend. I am the origin and the dissolution, the foundation of existence, the resting place, and the imperishable seed. Text 19. O Arjuna, I radiate heat, and I both withhold and send the rain. I am both immortality and certain death, both being and non-being. So, those are the verses we will cover this evening. And now we will go back to our first verse of this cluster, and we'll chant it together, call and response chanting. But first, all right, much better. So once again, the diacritical marks indicating how we pronounce the transliterated Sanskrit. Transliterated Sanskrit being Sanskrit rendered in the Roman alphabet. The tilde over the N after the J indicates that the N sound will have some body English to it, nya, and it'll be pronounced with the middle of your tongue up against kind of the middle to back of the roof of your mouth, nya. So it's kind of a nasal sound. And it transforms the J from a soft j sound into a harder g sound, almost like a G. So you'll see that twice in the first two words of the first line. A Y at the end of a word acts as a connector to the word that comes after. So instead of being like, say, an E sound, it'll be a Y sound that directly connects to the next word. The vowels with the dashes over them you already know. The dot under the R indicates kind of a hard R sound. And the accent mark over the S indicates a very deep SH sound, deep meaning in the back of your mouth as opposed to right behind your teeth. So a kind of a low-pitched sound as opposed to a high-pitched sh sound. So that's how it rolls out. So here we go. I will chant each line. You will chant each line back. Jnana yagyena chapyanye yajanto mamupasate ekatvena pritatvena bahudha vishvato mukham Translation: there are also others whose offerings consist of the cultivation of knowledge, who worship me as undifferentiated oneness, as diverse within many, and as the universal form whose face is turned everywhere. So let's take this apart a little bit. Jnana, Jagjana, means by cultivation of knowledge, or the sacrifice that consists of the cultivation of knowledge. Jagya means sacrifice, jnana means knowledge. So here Krishna is speaking of jnana yogis, or yogis who pursue self-realization through the yoga of knowledge. This involves renunciation, study, and meditation. And here there are three different kinds of jnana yogis that are being described. Now, you may remember earlier, Krishna described four kinds of people who approach him and offer themselves as his devotees. Those who are seeking relief from distress, those who wish for some material benediction, those who are seeking liberation, and those who are interested in the acquisition of knowledge. So here, this is going to be a subset of those who are seeking knowledge. And according to the traditional reading of this text, as it has been presented by previous teachers, it's understood that these three different ways of approaching Krishna are considered lesser than the others, the previously mentioned four. So the first is the idea of worshiping Krishna in his form as being formless, or under the conception of an undifferentiated oneness. Or, to put it another way, to consider that one's very self is the supreme person. This also means that everyone else is the supreme person, but there's only one supreme person and we are all it. So one thinks of oneself as being Brahman. And this kind of impersonal conception is the first one that's being thought about here. So why would this be considered a lesser realization? For one thing, there's a problem with it philosophically, which we have discussed previously. In order for this to be true, Brahman has to be subject to illusion. And Brahman, by definition, cannot be subject to illusion. So if I am thinking I am God, along with everyone else, and all I have to do is engage in austerities and intense study and meditation in order to realize that I am God, well, that's a lot of work. Does it make sense that the Supreme Being would have to go to that much trouble to get out from under the influence of an illusion that Krishna has already told us is his own energy that he stands within and is yet never affected by? From the standpoint of the Bhagavad Gita, this is not a clearly thought out position. Now, Krishna is being very liberal here because he is still considering that this person who thinks this way is his devotee. Because at least such a person understands that they are not their material body, that they are spiritual. Aham Brahmasmi, I am Brahman. That can be a quantitative statement in the case of the example given here, or it can be a qualitative statement, which is to say, I'm a spiritual being, not a material being. So here Krishna is speaking about someone who has a quantitative understanding and is therefore thinking, I am God. I remember early in my adventures in yoga philosophy when I was a teenager, I was having one of many arguments of some kind with my father. Standard operating procedure as a teenager. And in his frustration with my stubborn independence, he said, what do you think, you're a god? And I said, yes, I do. And I think you're God too. I think we're all God. That didn't help. Who'd have thunk it? That argument remained unresolved. The second group of others, besides those who engage in what Krishna has described as pure and uninterrupted devotional yoga, are those who worship Krishna as diverse within many. So what this refers to is, this refers to two things. One is the idea of worshiping demigods. Now, in the West, we don't really have demigods. We associate the whole idea of demigods with Indian Hindu spirituality. And someone who is attracted to this idea, someone who is a Westerner may be attracted to this idea, and may think of this idea in terms of, I can just pick any demigod. They're all just different faces of God. They're all just different forms that are representations of God, and I can just pick whichever one I like, and they're all the same. And this is a popular idea. As we shall see in subsequent verses, Krishna will characterize this as a mistaken idea, but it is nonetheless popular. When we follow that logic a step further, we get the idea that since all of these demigods are really just inventions, symbols, man-made projections of divinity in a form we can wrap our head around, well then, we can make up any form that we like and decide that that's our representation of the Supreme and worship that. Krishna also does not think very much of this idea. There's a system that Krishna is describing by which one can make progressive advancement along the path of yoga, by which one's consciousness can be purified and elevated to the point of self-realization. And this idea of inventing a form of God, or considering other forms from whatever culture to be equal to all other forms, is not part of that system. One way to think about this is that if you set up a box on the curb near the sidewalk or the street, and you write mailbox on it, and you put letters in the box, and other people put letters in the box because they see it's a box that says mailbox, those letters will not ever leave the box. They won't go anywhere because the box has not been authorized by, in this case, where I am, the United States Postal Service. And whoever put the box there really didn't have any authority from the Postal Service to put the box there. So nothing happens. You put the letter in the box and it just sits there. So similarly, there's actually a system, an authorized system that Krishna is describing here, by which one can invest their energies in a particular way in order to get a result, namely progress along the spiritual path. Earlier, Krishna recommended that in order to understand the art and science of sacrifice, yajna, one should approach a spiritual master who has seen the truth, a tattva darshana, someone who has actually experienced the results of these kinds of sacrifices, or proper sacrifice, I should say, and is knowledgeable in the techniques in general and can customize an authorized technique that is suitable for the particular situation or psychology of a spiritual aspirant. But such a person is not just making stuff up. They have heard from their teacher, who heard from their teacher, and so on, as we hear Krishna describe in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, that the system of transmission of knowledge in yoga starts from Krishna himself and then proceeds through a chain of disciplic succession, or parampara, one after the other. And every so often that chain is broken and Krishna appears in one form or another to start it again, to renovate or reinvigorate the system as needed. The third group of people that Krishna is describing here, who he is counting amongst his devotees, even though they're not getting it quite right, are those who worship him as the all-pervading Lord of the universe, whose face is turned everywhere. So that's a translation of Vishvataha Mukham. So mukha, face. Those of you who are yoga enthusiasts, modern yoga enthusiasts, are familiar with this term mukha, adho mukha shavasana. So Vishvata Mukham. This indicates the universal form, or the universe as a person with unlimited faces, unlimited eyes, unlimited forms, seeing everything everywhere all the time. In other words, God as the universe itself. And someone who thinks there is nothing beyond this material world, and the universe as a whole is the supreme being, is being described here. One who is engaged in material science but is not an atheist, thinks of the universe itself as the ultimate being, and finds spiritual inspiration from studying the universe. So this is a legitimate form of Krishna. And this is the form that he will begin to speak about in the next verses that we're coming to, and that he will display to Arjuna in the 11th chapter. So these three, oh, that's right. the all-pervading Lord of the universe, whose face is turned everywhere, also echoes back the idea of Vasudeva, all-pervading, everywhere, in our invocation mantra, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, indicating the Supreme Person who is all-pervading. So of these three, the first, the idea that I am God and everything is God, is considered the least correct understanding, and yet still spiritual, and therefore Krishna is including such people in his estimation of who counts as his devotee. Then the next higher level of understanding is demigods, those who are representatives of the Lord for the particular purpose of executing the business of the universe. Whereas just making stuff up, just deciding that you can invent any form, would be considered just off. And then the third is the highest of the three understandings, the idea of the universal form, that the universe is a form of the Supreme Person. So we spent a fair amount of time on this specific verse, and if you have any questions about what I have discussed just with this first verse, please go ahead and pop those into the Q&A box. Now, if you're watching this on Facebook, I cannot toggle back and forth between Facebook and Zoom without disturbing the audio and video, apparently. I will need to find an assistant who can do that for me at some point when my business expands such that I can have assistance. So if you're watching this on Facebook, do me a favor and send me a private message with your question. In that way, I know I will get it and I will be able to engage with your questions after the fact. I apologize for not having the technical ability to be in two places at once. Okay. Our next verse is verse 16 of the 9th chapter. Krishna continues, I am the ritual, I am the sacrifice, and I am the benediction. I am the healing herb and the transcendental chant. Indeed, it is I alone who am the clarified butter, I who am the fire, and I who am the offering. So this is an interesting verse that harkens back to a previous verse. So remember, the Gita has this kind of elliptical structure to it. And if we look at this verse, so this is 16. Okay, I am the ritual, I am the sacrifice, I am the offering to the ancestors, I am the healing herb and the transcendental chant. Indeed, it is I alone who am the clarified butter, I who am the fire, and I who am the offering. If we go back to chapter 4, verse 24, we find a very similar verse, but in a different context. Here, Krishna has been speaking about those engaged in yajna, in acts of sacrifice, where every single action is dedicated to him. Or in other words, where someone is practicing Ishvara Pranidhana, as we find in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, offering everything, one's whole life, to Ishvara, or the Supreme Person. So here we find that Krishna says, in such acts of sacrifice, the instrument by which the offering is made. The act of offering, the offering itself, The one who makes the offering and the fire that consumes the offering are all of the same spiritual nature. In other words, if someone engages in making an offering in the practice of Ishvara Pranidhana, with the consciousness that Krishna is the ritual that you are engaged in, the sacrifice that you are making, the thing that you are offering. The elements that may be involved, and any mantra that you may chant. The clarified butter indicating that which you bring to the sacrifice and pour onto the sacrificial fire. If someone engages in sacrifice, making an offering of devotion, with this consciousness, putting these two verses together, then everything, the whole experience and the experiencer are all raised to the level of Brahman, or to the level of spiritual experience. So a nice way to understand this verse is to connect it to this previous verse. So in these next three verses, 17, 18, and 19, Krishna will continue along this line and expand this idea out to include basically everything. So what he's going to do here is describe how he is the universal form, or how he is the all-pervading Lord of the universe, whose face is turned everywhere. So we continue with verse 17. I am the father of this universe, the mother, the creator, and the grandfather. I am what is to be known, that which purifies, and the vibration Om. Know me to be the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, and the Yajur Veda as well. Here, Krishna is explaining to us how he is male, female, and gender neutral at the same time. So, as everything is emanating from him, everything is coming from him, and I'm using now him for the sake of simplicity's sake, and because Krishna's form, as Krishna, the person, is male, he is indicating that he is not limited in that way, that he encompasses both male and female, and is therefore ultimately the source of creation unto himself. He is also the grandfather. So the grandfather is the cause of the father or mother. So kind of stepping back as the ultimate cause of all causes. In Sanskrit, the phrase sarva karana karanam. Karana, cause, karanam, ultimate cause. So the cause of all subsequent causes is how to think about Krishna's position as grandfather. I am what is to be known, the ultimate object of knowledge. So there are three categories of knowledge in the Vedic system: knowledge of relationships, knowledge of practices, and knowledge of the ultimate goal. Here, Krishna is speaking about his relationship to practices in the previous verse, and his position as the ultimate goal of knowledge in this verse. He is also speaking about his own relationship to everything, as both being everything and yet retaining his own unique individuality. And simultaneously one with and yet distinct from everything that he is describing. Everything, all of his energies, I should say, that make up the entirety of reality. That which purifies, and the vibration Om. So we find this also in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The recommended practice of meditation is japa, the repetition of the sound vibration Om, pranava, Omkara, and the understanding that the practice of chanting Om, the repetition of Om, purifies the consciousness so that we can actually see the true self beyond the fluctuations of the mind. And the reason that Om is purifying is because Om is non-different from Ishvara. So the sound is not different from that which the sound is the representation of. It's a transcendental sound vibration. A material sound has a relationship to that which it indicates. So I'm looking at a camera, and the sound vibration camera is not the camera that I am looking at, or that is looking at me. Whereas Om is Ishvara. And when we chant Om, or when we chant Krishna's mantra, Hare-Krishna, then it is purifying because we are coming into direct contact with that which the sound is indicating. So it's absolute as opposed to relative. The word camera is relative to the object, the camera, whereas Om is not a relative sound vibration. It is a transcendental or absolute sound. Therefore, there is no difference between the sound and that which the sound is indicating. And know me to be the Rig Veda, Samaveda, and the Yajur Veda as well. So the Vedas are the original books of knowledge that act as manuals, an operator's guide for the material world, and the ultimate goal of Vedic knowledge is to understand what is beyond this material world, who we are beyond this material body. So this ultimate original source of knowledge is also Krishna. The Vedas are understood to be the breath of Vishnu. If you are having any questions about this, please go ahead and ask away. Meanwhile, as I anxiously wait for your questions, I will move on to the next verse. Verse 18, I am the goal, the sustainer, the master and the witness. I am the abode, the shelter, and the most intimate friend. I am the origin and the dissolution, the foundation of existence, the resting place, and the imperishable seed. So here we're getting into some far out esoteric ideas. We've already talked about how Krishna is the ultimate goal, and knowledge of the ultimate goal is part 1/3 of the Vedic system. The sustainer. There is a understanding that of the three principal personalities of the material world, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma is in charge of creation, Vishnu is in charge of maintenance, and Shiva is in charge of destruction. However, the original source of Brahma and Shiva, according to Bhakti Yoga theory, is Vishnu. We have a series of Vishnu expansions in the course of the creation of all of the infinite material worlds. So there's no real contradiction to this when Krishna says, I am the sustainer, I am the origin, and the dissolution. Because Krishna, in his form of Garbhodakshayi Vishnu, is the origin of Brahma. Brahma appears from the lotus flower that grows from the navel of Lord Vishnu. So Brahma is a contingent being. And while he is in charge of the secondary act of creation, the manufacturing of the universe as we know it, the original creation of the entire material cosmic manifestation and all the energy that is used by Brahma to manufacture the universe, that all comes from Krishna, Vishnu. And the dissolution is also ultimately Krishna, because Shiva is an interesting personality who has one foot in the material world and one foot in the spiritual world, described as the shadow of the glow of the glands of Vishnu when he is engaged in the act of populating the material world by looking in the direction of Durga Devi, the expansion of Lakshmi, the goddess of fortune, for the sake of facilitating the creation of the material world and the entry of all beings who populate the material world into that material world. I want to share something with you. And let's see if I can do it without mucking up the works here. Because I've got the wrong, oh, no, I have the wrong window open, so I'm not going to go for that. Never mind. Let's see, we'll come back to here. And come back out. Okay, so one of the Sanskrit words that's utilized in this verse, suhrit. So hrit means in the heart, hridaya, in the heart, of the heart, to the heart, hrid. And su means very, or an amplifier. So suhrit indicates the most intimate friend, the one who is actually closest to our heart, or whose heart is closest to us. It is said that the Paramatma, the Supreme Person, resides within the heart of all beings. So this is an indication of how close Krishna really is to everyone as the most intimate friend. The verse concludes with, I am the resting place and the imperishable seed. Now, I've seen one translation of the Sanskrit indicating resting place as womb. I'm not sure about how correct that Sanskrit that translation of the Sanskrit might be. And I think my teachers, who are Sanskrit scholars, might disagree. I'm looking forward to asking them about it next time I get a chance. But it is an interesting idea that both the masculine and feminine aspects that are responsible for creation reside within Krishna. Therefore, the idea of being both the seed of existence and the place where that seed is planted in order for everything to manifest. All right. And then finally, our last verse for this evening. O Arjuna, I radiate heat, and I both withhold and send forth rain. So here, Krishna is indicating he is the ultimate source of the power of Surya, the demigod in charge of the sun, and of Indra, who is the demigod in charge of managing the weather. I am both immortality and certain death. The light and dark side of God. The light side is the spiritual nature, which is eternal, characterized by eternality. And the dark side is that side which is controlled by time and which brings about inevitable death. As we will hear later, Krishna will indicate that he himself is time. And then finally, both being and non-being. So we often hear this idea that God is not actually a being, that you cannot describe God, that there's the stuff that we associate with a being that we need to have in order to be able to wrap our heads around some conception of a supreme person or a supreme being. Therefore, we project personness on something that is inherently impersonal. And as we've discussed in previous classes, this is the most common theological conception or philosophical conception of a supreme, not actually a being, something that is beyond being and therefore inconceivable to us. Here, Krishna is saying, well, I'm both. I am both being and non-being. That is to say, I am both formless and someone who has a form. I am beyond conception, and yet I will reveal myself to someone who is devoted to me. Both spirit and matter is another way to think about this. Being is understood to be spiritual, or sat, eternal, which is actually the word that is used in this verse. And asat, being a negating prefix, means not true, not eternal, not real, somehow or other not actually having the same quality of reality as sat, or actual reality. So there's reality in material life, and then there's the real reality of spiritual life. And that is another way to understand this idea of both being and non-being. That which has duration is understood to be real. That which has no duration or is temporary is understood to be illusory, or not having the same quality of realness as that which is sat. And that closes out Krishna's description of himself, a partial description of himself as the universal form, and all the different ways that one can see Krishna within the universe within how we move through the universe, and as personally present within every offering that we make when we are practicing Ishvara Pranidhana or devotional yoga. Which takes us to the conclusion of our evening. We have looked at 3 ways to fall short of pure devotion and yet still be in the category of a devotee in some form or fashion, a bhakti yogi. We've gotten a little bit of foreshadowing in these 4 verses of the universal form, and Krishna will reveal more in a subsequent chapter. We covered verses 15 through 19 of the Yoga of Royal Secrets, otherwise known as the most confidential knowledge. And just a quick recap of why this chapter is called the most confidential knowledge. General knowledge, as we have discussed in earlier chapters, is the basic information that we are not these temporary material bodies, we're eternal spirit souls. That's our basic knowledge. Then confidential knowledge. Everything is ultimately spiritual. The divine nature of the world, that the truth can be found in the unity or the ground of being known as Brahman. Then the next level of confidential knowledge is that there's a distinction between each of us as eternal individual spiritual beings and the supreme spiritual being, the Atma and the Param Atma. Brahman and Para-Brahman is another way to express that in Sanskrit. And then the most confidential knowledge is what Krishna is revealing in this chapter, which is his personal nature, how to engage in a relationship of pure devotion with him in his personal form that facilitates the highest level of intimate relationship. So that's what we got. Let me know what you have in the way of questions as we close out our evening. Those of you watching on Facebook, I will be looking for your questions as soon as I'm able to pop over to the Facebook page. I will look for your private messages or anything that you have in the comments as well. If you would like to ask me questions after the fact, you were not able to join us live, or if you have a question that pops up later, you can write to me at hari@harikirtan.com. I am always very, very anxious to field your questions, hear your comments, and find out about your realizations. Next week, we will continue with the Yoga of Royal Secrets, the most confidential knowledge, by looking at the results of worshiping demigods, according to Krishna, and the idea of many paths, many destinations. So often we hear this idea of many paths, one destination. Well, Krishna is going to tell you something different, that there are many paths and they all go to many, many different destinations. They may all eventually lead to one destination, but we may be taking the scenic route. Anyway, we'll find out when we look at verses 20 through 25, and that will be next Thursday night. All right, last call for questions over here. And I see that we do not have questions on this end, so hopefully I will hear from you later if you have any questions, and I will head on over to Facebook and see what we got going on over there. I thank you very, very much for joining me this evening. It is always a great pleasure for me to be here with you and a great honor to have you here with me. I hope to see you all again next Thursday night. Until then.